Good, how are you?
Not too bad, thank you. So,
Nice to meet you.
making a message?
Yeah, I just have conversations.
Yeah?
Yeah.
Cool.
What do you think of this?
I mean, I disagree, but I think, I don't know. I'd be curious what, like, the statistics are and stuff. Like, I don't know.
Statistics
Like,
about
just
what?
statistically, like, how many kids actually do that? I don't know.
Yeah, so they don't release exact figures from our children's hospitals here in Canada, but it's for sure tens of thousands of kids across North America.
Like, over what? In a year, or?
So there's a few good articles you could look up. One's by Reuters, one's by Manhattan Institute. And if you like, you can even email me and I can send you some statistics. But in North America each year, there are probably about 2,000 children having double mastectomies as young as 12 years old.
There's no way.
All right.
I would love to see.
You don't need to
stats
believe
that
me. This
back
is
that
based
up.
on insurance data.
But I know, like, in the States, like, I've seen some data that shows it's, like, less than 200 kids a year. And
No,
they're
that's
a country of...
completely false.
But that's coming from...
I mean, each
like,
children's
the health
hospital here in Canada does more than that themselves.
There's no chance.
Well, okay.
Yeah. I just think your stats you're full of shit, you know? Like, I don't know.
It's based off insurance data. If you have a phone, I can bring it up for you right
Sure,
now.
I would love to.
Sure.
What would I look up to find that?
Well, there's a few articles.
Mm-hmm.
The most recent one is from the Manhattan Institute. So Google Manhattan Institute, gender, transition statistics. Try that.
This one here? Here, so I'll make it brighter. Examining global shifts in gender.
No. A consensus no longer, that one. So that's a good introductory article for you to read.
Cool. Yeah, I'll read this. I find, because I've looked into this a lot, and I haven't personally been able to find any stats that are near close to the numbers that people like you are pushing, you know.
So it's not numbers that I'm pushing, it's just what is. You can look up.
I think
Here, take a couple notes here if you want to.
Sure.
The CAS review is a good study for you to read. This is the world's most comprehensive, systematic review of all the scientific literature that's been done.
One sec, let me make a new note. Alright, sorry, what were you saying?
So look up the CAS review, C-A-S-S. It's a review.
I've read that.
by-
I've heard that, yeah. What else?
Well, if you've read it, you'd know it's 380 pages long.
Well, I've looked through it, skimmed through it. But,
So at the Tavistock,
but the CAS
do you
review
know what the
is
Tavistock is?
Tavistock, like T-A-V-I-S.
T-O-C-K. Do you know what that is?
No.
Okay, so that was the gender clinic in England.
Okay.
They had 15,000 kids on the waiting list when they shut it down.
Okay.
And you're trying to tell me this is affecting like a couple hundred kids. That's one gender clinic with 15,000 just on the waiting list.
But what, like shutting what down exactly? Like,
Oh, they
wait
stopped
lists
prescribing puberty blockers to all new patients in England. They stopped it in Scotland. They all but stopped it in Finland, where they conducted a systematic review and found this isn't helping kids. They stopped it in Sweden, where they also conducted a systematic review of their own. You can find all these reviews, by the way, on a really great website called segm.org.
S-E-G-M?
Yeah, the Society for Evidence-Based Gender Medicine.
Okay.
It's
Do you
done
think
by
any
doctors.
of these, like, CAS review and these have any, like, biases of their own, or?
Well, you should read it.
I will. Because I did read the CAS review. I think
I'm not here to offer you my opinion.
Okay.
Well, you for sure haven't read it. I can tell by the way you're speaking.
Okay. I mean, I did look at it. It came out like a year or two ago, didn't it?
Yeah, about a year ago.
Yeah, so I mean, it's hard for me to speak for something that I read that long ago.
Mhm.
But from my brief recollection, I think it was a pretty biased study.
No, that's totally absurd. It's not just a study, it's looking at all the studies. It's not just a study, it's looking at all of the studies that have been done. That's what a systematic review is.
So just upon quickly looking it up, it's a non-peer reviewed report.
The reports it's reviewing itself are peer-reviewed reports. Anyway, you can look it up. That's done by a left-leaning pediatrician named Dr. Hilary Cass, not by some politician.
Okay, yeah, I'll check it out.
And I would encourage you also to read the WPATH files. That was written actually by a woman here in Ottawa, a friend of mine, named Mia Hughes. That's leaked documents, leaked videos from these trans health professionals themselves. It's coming straight from the mouths of the so-called experts. Tough to refute.
Check it out.
Yeah.
I don't like to talk about things that I'm not informed on.
All right.
But I do think that it's a bit inflammatory what you do, and maybe blowing things out of proportion a little much. Like, do you think that there's any case at all where puberty blockers would be acceptable? Or like, do you think that it's totally...
Well, there's no such thing as a transgender child.
Okay. Like, do you think that gender dysphoria is a thing?
Sure, distress about one's sex is real.
Okay.
Yeah.
And do you think that there's medication that can, like, help somebody along?
No, we shouldn't be medicating kids who have distress about their sex. That's
Doesn't Canada
absurd.
have a law? Like, don't you have to be 16 or older
No.
before you can get like any sort of gender-affirming surgery and things like that?
So, puberty blockers are given according to the World Professional Association of Transgender Health, for transgender health. The recommendation is to give them to children at Tanner stage 2 of puberty. So that's the beginning of puberty for girls. That's about 2 years before they've had their periods. They're going to be 9, 10 years old. Boys are typically hitting puberty 6 months to a year later. So those are pretty little kids, you know. Some of them still believe in Santa Claus. And when you look at the Cass review, for example, what you'll learn is that 70% of the kids going to their gender identity development service there had 5 or more coexisting mental health comorbidities. Not just one problem, not just 2. On average, the majority had 5 or more. Depression, anxiety, abuse, sexual abuse is extremely common. In 52% of cases, one of the parents was either deceased or out of the picture. Parents were statistically 10 times more likely to have been sex offenders. These are kids in state care who are widely overrepresented, and it's children with autism. Majority of these cases, according to their own statistics, 35% of the kids, and this was out of a sample of 1,069 children, 35% had moderate to severe autism, never mind the more mild cases. So the lie that's going around is that there's such a thing as a child born in the wrong body, and I think that's an extraordinarily abusive message to send. We shouldn't be telling our children they're born wrong. We should be telling them they're beautiful just as they are. We should tell them there's no right or wrong way to be a boy or girl. And I know you agree with all those statements.
I just think that the way you're framing it is maybe a little disingenuous.
Like what?
Like you said, I have to do more research, clearly.
So what way am I framing that's disingenuous?
I just think that it's something that's you're blowing out of proportion. That I think that this targets a very small portion of the population. I don't think it's something that's being pushed on kids. Like, I think that discussing it and pushing something on kids is totally different, right?
So another article you can look up, and this was reported by the New York Times a few years ago, who are traditionally on the opposite end of this argument from people like myself. They reported, now this is just in the US, 300,000 children between the age of 12 and 17 had been diagnosed with gender dysphoria. Those are just official diagnoses.
Okay. And this is a New York Times article?
There's another organization called Do No Harm. This is an organization of doctors. They also released statistics on this last year. And they have a database from each individual hospital, how many kids that they've seen based on insurance data. Now, this insurance data is probably only capturing about half of the kids because it doesn't capture those who privately paid, of course. It doesn't capture those who use donor funds. There's a lot of that going on. It only captured children who had an official gender dysphoria diagnosis, and they don't even use that diagnosis a lot of the time. according to Jamie Reed, a whistleblower from the gender clinic at the Washington University Gender Clinic in Missouri. Only in about half the cases are they even diagnosing gender dysphoria for these children. And she was a whistleblower who will tell you all the same things I'm telling you. She was a case manager. She oversaw 1,000 kids over the 4 years that she worked there. And blew the whistle on this because it's total madness what's going on. But this do no harm database, it's not including veterans pay, it's not including all the Kaiser Permanente plans either, which is a huge number. But you'll get figures there.
Okay.
And it's for sure over the years, it's been tens of thousands of kids being medicalized, hundreds of thousands diagnosed. And what's interesting when I have these conversations, and I've had tens of thousands of them over the years all across the world, nobody can really even tell me what a gender identity is. If I say, what does it mean for a girl to be a boy? No one has an answer.
Right.
It's just a feeling, apparently.
Sure.
But our sex is not a feeling.
Well, so, I mean, you've probably heard my typical answer, right? Like, I think sex is I'm by no means a scientist, too, so whatever I say doesn't hold much merit. But I think that, sex is, you're obviously born with a certain gender, but I think the way that people present themselves and maybe feel comfortable in public could be a little more fluid than that.
So you can express yourselves however you want.
Yeah. And you have no problem with adults, right? Like, if you're 18 and over, somebody then wants to
I do have
transition.
problems with that in terms of so someone turns 18. It's their birthday. They can now walk into Planned Parenthood, walk out 20 minutes later with a prescription for testosterone. Yeah, that's not okay.
How come?
Because these practitioners know absolutely nothing about this young person, and they're putting them on hormones which are going to cause irreversible damage. They should be screening for trauma. They should be screening for abuse. They should be dealing with other mental health comorbidities.
Okay.
Because as we know, in the vast majority of these cases, there are other mental health things going on. But right away, in one appointment, and they know absolutely nothing, they're harming these young people for life. So I don't agree with that at all.
And this is, see, again, I don't really know. Like, so you can go in and 20 minutes later for sure be walking out. Like, there's
Literally.
no question. Like,
That's right. Because with the trend, and what's really changed, especially over the last 10 years, and it gets more this way all the time, is the activists, the trans activists, say to even question a gender identity is sort of abusive. Why would you even need therapy? You're therefore saying there's something wrong with my gender identity. This is their argument. And so the trend is to go away from therapy altogether. And this practice of transitioning children, this really took off around 2015. This started in the Netherlands the decade before that with a handful of kids. And they established what was called the Dutch protocol, where they would screen for other mental health comorbidities.
Yeah.
They wouldn't start them on cross-sex hormones, the opposite sex hormones, until they were 16.
Right.
And then when this came over into the US and Canada, these safeguards over time have just completely vanished.
Okay.
And kids are getting puberty blockers here at Ottawa's Children's Hospital on their first appointment. It's not always the case, but it is the case statistically in about half of these cases. And again, there's another site for Canada you can look up called Canadian Gender Report, where they have statistics on this. But we don't have as many statistics in Canada because they don't release them.
Just because I know, like I've said, that I've looked up numbers in the States and it's nothing close to what people...
Well, I've just given you all the factual statistical
so I am
numbers.
going to look through those for sure. I find that things are blown out of proportion.
And again, those numbers are probably about ballpark 50% because it's not including private pay, it's not including those without a gender dysphoria diagnosis, it's not including Kaiser Permanente and all that. Anyway, it doesn't even matter if it was, honestly, it doesn't matter if it was 100 kids being medicalized or 30,000, which is more like what it's been in North America. This ideology itself is damaging. To have children believe that there's something wrong with them, that they're supposed to be something they're not, that's an abusive message. And if we were just medicalizing hundreds of kids, I'd still be doing this because this ideology itself is the root of this evil. Gender ideology is a new idea. It's an extraordinarily damaging idea. And it's mostly affecting kids who are already vulnerable and already hurting in some form or another. And like in a cult, what happens is they get love bombed, they get a lot of attention and affection right away. Whereas before maybe they were feeling like a misfit. And now they're getting tons of love on social media. And they're falling for this lie that the reason they're unhappy is because they were born in the wrong body. And that's damaging on its own. What follows from that in far too many cases is the medicalization. And in Canada, and you can look this up, National Post has reported on it. I don't always love their reporting on this, but there's, I mean, facts are facts. They're definitely doing double mastectomies on 14-year-old girls in Canada.
Okay.
In the US, they're doing it as young as 12. Again, from insurance data.
Because I also, another thing that I've read is that a lot of the numbers that come from like gender affirming surgery and things like that are actually like males getting breast reductions and like females, same thing, right?
So that's not what this is. So again,
I know the numbers get kind of skewed because they get lumped in with all this.
Well, you can read all the things you want to read.
Yeah.
But in that Manhattan Institute article, they give a range, and these are conservative numbers. Again, they're going to be higher because we don't have all the data. But it was something like a range of between 50 and 179 girls under the age of 12 and a half have had double mastectomies. So
how many, sorry? Say that again.
It's a range of 50 to 179.
Okay.
Under the age of 12 and a half.
Yeah.
I've got a woman from Kaiser Permanente. Her name's Kellen Lackhart. She now identifies as a man. She's a psychologist there at their clinic in Oakland. And I've tweeted this out many times. If you email me, I'm happy to send you the video. But she admits on camera that they've cut off the breasts of a 12-year-old girl, and they've done vaginoplasties on 16-year-old boys, having started the process at 15. Now, when she says starting the process, what she's probably referring to is hair removal, which they do 6 months to a year in advance. Otherwise, you get these ingrown hairs and infections, and it's a disaster.
Right.
And that happens in these cases anyway. And they have huge medical complications. Scott Nugent is one that comes to mind. She's a woman who transitioned as an adult, but almost died.
Yeah.
Had the phalloplasty done, where they carve off your forearm tissue and fashion it into a fake phallus.
See,
But
I just think
but they're doing this on kids, man, and they're autistic kids. They're kids who've had sexual abuse. You can go watch a video of mine from UCLA where a young woman named... Here, just come this way a little bit if you don't mind.
I'd rather not be on camera.
Okay.
I probably already am.
Yeah, you are. It's just the cars are coming close to you.
Okay.
This girl, Clementine, she'd suffered child sexual abuse as a 7-year-old. She naturally wasn't really looking forward to becoming a woman.
Right.
It wasn't just a one-time thing. She'd had some continuing childhood sexual abuse. At the age of 12, she was seeing her school counselor, who decided that because she didn't want to be a woman, she must be trans. And so this idea was implanted into her head. Her parents were told she was trans and that they'd better take her to the gender clinic. So they went to the Children's Hospital of Los Angeles, where they saw Dr. Johanna Olsen Kennedy. On the first appointment, Johanna Olsen Kennedy, who is one of the premier doctors in the world doing this, one of the premier experts, she was given nearly $10 million by the NIH to conduct a study that she buried, still hasn't been released, because she didn't like the results. But she separated Clementine from her parents at the age of 12. On the first appointment, she prescribed her puberty blockers. Separately, she told her parents they could have a dead daughter or a live son, which is the classic coercive, manipulative garbage used to get these parents to go along with this. At 13, she pushed her onto testosterone. At 14, she pushed her to get a double mastectomy. She told her that they get better results when they're done young. The testosterone caused psychosis. She went off it at 17. She officially detransitioned at 19. But she's now suing. Her lawyers are Campbell Miller Payne, a law firm out of Texas. They have about 13 different lawsuits going on. And honestly, hers is like a classic case.
So are there ever situations where it ends up benefiting someone long term? Like, is there anybody going through serious gender dysphoria that actually could potentially use puberty blockers?
Well, there are people who are going to claim it's helped them. I hear this all the time. I don't necessarily believe it. You know, when you talk to someone in a cult, they're all going to tell you that they're happy. And when these people come up to me and they tell me how happy they are, they're often shaking and screaming and sometimes crying. So there's mental health issues going on.
Okay.
But the detransition rate, it takes time.
Right.
Because they've chased this impossible goal of changing sexes. And their whole community kind of pushes this. So there's social pressure. And it usually takes like 7 to 10 years for them to say, my gosh, what have I done? You know, they get to be 25.
Right.
Coincidentally,
I'm
the same.
That, like,
yeah.
you trust what these people are saying, you don't trust what these people are saying.
That's not what I said.
Well, you're saying you don't quite believe. That's pretty much what you said. You said you don't quite believe. Like, right? People are coming up saying they're happy, but you don't believe them. So I'm just wondering how much your own biases are affecting the message you're pushing. You know, because clearly you don't agree with transgenderism at all. It seems.
Yeah, that's right. So here's the thing. We know from studies historically that more than 80% of kids with gender dysphoria, back when this just affected a handful of the population, 30, 40 years ago, this was 1 out of 30,000 kids. And it was mostly boys.
Yeah.
Today it's completely flipped. It's mostly girls. It's 3 to 1, girls versus boys going to these gender clinics.
Okay.
And we know historically from these academic studies, which are all up on my website, by the way, that more than 80% just grew out of it when they went through puberty. Their gender dysphoria desisted.
Okay.
And we're talking about severe gender dysphoria from a young age.
Right.
Not, I'm 14 now and suddenly I realize I'm born wrong. Consistent, serious distress. And in the vast majority of cases, they outgrew it. And the majority of these kids, according to the biggest study that was done, which was only 139 participants, but this didn't affect a lot back then, and this was a study with just boys, 63.6% grew up to be gay.
Okay.
So people talk about conversion therapy. The real conversion therapy going on is taking kids who would grow up to be gay, these gender non-conforming children, these effeminate boys, telling them that they were born wrong, sterilizing them, maiming children, turning them into lifelong pharmaceutical patients, sending teenage girls into menopause, cutting out their womb as teenagers because 4 or 5 years of testosterone causes vaginal and uterine atrophy, when a lot of these kids would just grow up to be gay. And you talk to gay men, you should do this. Go talk to the gay community. I've done it a lot. I've got a lot of gay friends. They'll tell me if they were growing up today, they would have for sure transitioned. So what's the difference? Gay or trans? What's the difference? Gender nonconformity, both sides. I can define what gay is, same-sex attraction.
Right.
You can put a gay man in an MRI machine and show him gay porn and the parts of his brain associated with sexual arousal will light up.
Right.
It's a physically measurable thing. Trans? What is it?
But I mean, it's gender dysphoria, right? Which is, sorry. Your phone is okay.
This one twisted again.
Oh,
Oh, there's a piece that flew off.
yeah.
Thank you. That just.
That gust came out of nowhere.
That was a big one.
Yikes.
Is this live streamed or
No.
no?
I'm just gonna hold it.
Would it be cool if I asked you not to post video of me or anything? Or
Oh, you should have told me that before we started.
no?
Yeah, I'm out here to record conversations. Anyway, you're very reasonable. You don't need to worry about anything.
I appreciate it.
But,
You not cool.
well,
Well,
we can end it if you want. But,
Well, I wanted to have a discussion. Okay.
anyway, what
You're
were we
just gonna
talking
tell
about?
me, okay.
Well, you've already been on camera basically the whole time. What were we talking about? oh yeah, gay versus trans. Like, what is trans? No one can tell me.
Well, it's gender dysphoria, is it not?
Well, is it? So someone's distressed about their sex, that's now means that they're some other identity?
I know historically, like, trans people are a thing, right? Like, they do exist.
Well, it's just an identity label. It's just a label. It's not a physical
thing.
Say
the same thing about homosexuality then? Like,
well, no, absolutely not. Because as just discussed, that's a physically measurable thing and it's something you can find. They're attracted to the same sex. It's very simple to define. But now we're going to take someone who has distress about their sex, which is usually also going along with other mental health issues, and we're going to put this identity label on them and tell them that they were born in the wrong body.
Right.
So because a child's distressed, now we're saying they're born in the wrong body and they're really a boy.
But
that makes no sense.
About children, right? I'm talking about like transgender adults as well.
Well, I'm here to talk about kids.
Okay.
The adult conversation is a different conversation.
Kind of tied together because it seems like you have a disdain for transgender in general, right? I know you're focusing on the children aspect of it, which I think that there's a lot of nuance there and things that could be, there's definitely some talk that could be had about the way it's handled in children. But I think to deny transgenderism as a whole is irresponsible, perhaps. And maybe...
Yeah, I deny that it exists. I think it's a made-up label.
Okay.
Yeah. And that doesn't mean I have disdain for people.
Right.
Quite the opposite. And we hear this lie all the time. The number one thing trans activists will tell you is that kids are going to kill themselves if we don't transition. It's a brutal, terrible lie. Even the lawyer for the ACLU at the Supreme Court just in December, 4 months ago, a woman named Chase Strangio, she identifies as a man.
Yeah.
But they were hearing oral arguments for the Tennessee ban of child transition. And she admitted before the Supreme Court that that's been a lie. She said, actually, well, what we're talking about is completed suicides, and those are thankfully very rare.
Right.
And what she meant was completed suicides are very rare, and what they're talking about is suicidal ideation.
Okay.
Well, yes, obviously suicidal ideation is higher. No one's arguing that. It's higher for kids with eating disorders, with anorexia, with autism, with sexual abuse, with trauma, with parents who are missing. Yeah. But there's never been evidence to suggest there's some epidemic of suicides going on, and it's the number one thing they always use. And we have this study out of Finland about a year ago. And you can look this one up too if you want to make a note.
Sure.
They looked at 24 years worth of data from their gender clinic.
Who was it, sorry?
In Finland. So this is the only study that's actually ever been done into childhood suicides. About 2,000 kids went to their gender clinic from 1996 to 2019. That's the data they looked at. And of course it continued to explode after that. And they compared those 2,000 kids to a control group of 17,000 kids. Over those 24 years, I believe it was 6 suicides, which worked out to an annualized rate of 0.052%.
Okay.
And I think there were 17 suicides in the control group. There wasn't a big discrepancy between the two. The annualized rate was slightly higher in the kids at the gender clinic, but we aren't talking about some epidemic of suicides. And it's just so irresponsible to weaponize suicide. All the suicide organizations who help with this will tell you themselves, you don't advertise suicide because it creates a social contagion, puts the idea in their head. Just like this whole trans thing is a social contagion, primarily affecting girls who are prone to social contagions, but there's no epidemic of suicides. And the other thing that's been used to try to sell this is that puberty blockers are reversible, which is just totally not true. In practice, depending on the gender clinic, but we have statistics from different clinics, it's like 98% of the kids who start on puberty blockers go on to cross-sex hormones. Because when they show up at that gender clinic, they're not exploring their gender identity, which is the sales pitch. They're not just buying time to remain looking neutral while they explore their gender identity. They're fully bought in to this lie that they were born in the wrong body.
Okay.
And they want the puberty blockers and they want the cross-sex hormones because they want to look like the opposite sex. Whereas we know if we left these kids alone, that they would almost all grow out of it. We're talking about 10-year-olds, 11-year-olds, 12-year-olds. They cannot consent to causing lifelong harm to their bodies. They can't consent to becoming infertile. They don't understand what they're signing up for. They're troubled kids. And that's a reasonable take. That's like the most common sense thing in the world for anyone who remembers what a child is.
Yeah.
But now we're putting this decision on children. And in countries like Canada, we even take these decisions away from parents, where parents can't even stop it. In BC, where I'm from, a father named Robert Hoogland was powerless to stop his 13-year-old daughter from going on puberty blockers and testosterone.
Was that because the mother thought it was appropriate?
The mother was down with it, but...
So there was parental.
But, well, from one of them.
Yeah.
It takes more than one.
Well, okay.
But
there was.
But even if there wasn't,
Yeah.
in BC, and we have similar laws elsewhere, there's a law called the Infants Act, which says parental authority, parental approval is not needed for any medical procedure, provided the doctor thinks it's necessary.
Okay.
So you have the endocrinologist there named Brendan Hirsch sending a letter to the dad saying that he could be a friend and advisor, literally a friend and advisor to his 13-year-old daughter, but he couldn't intervene in the medical decision.
Right.
Because these doctors themselves, people think, oh, they're doctors, right? This appeal to authority fallacy. Doctors are biased. Doctors fall for all sorts of crazy practices medically all throughout history. And the doctors that run these gender clinics are amongst the biggest trans activists that there are. And when you read the WPATH files, you'll really understand that.
Okay.
I mean, we've got Dr. Marcy Bowers, president of WPATH. This is a man identifying as a woman. He's performed over 2,000 vaginoplasties. And he says in this video that I've tweeted out many times, it might be in the WPATH files. I can send it to you individually if you want. He says, and it's also in the WPATH files written down in an email, that they know of no children, no boys, specifically boys, who starting puberty blockers at 10 or stage 2 have ever been able to have an orgasm as an adult. So you're starting an 11-year-old boy on these, and you're destroying his future adult sexual function for the rest of his life. They can't consent to that.
Right.
They don't even know what it means. And he says in this video, it's actually a Zoom call he had with Duke University. Johanna Olsen Kennedy was on the call. He says, and you know, intimacy is important in relationships. And so what do? Do we start the puberty blockers later? Do we take them off the puberty blockers and let some puberty resume? It's a mystery, you know, we're still figuring it out. Like they're literally doing this unregulated experiment on children, having no idea what the heck's going on. These drugs have never been approved by any medical authority. They've never been approved by Health Canada to be given to these kids. They've never been approved by the FDA. No medical authority in the world. There's never been a single clinical trial.
And we're I find that hard to believe.
It's 100% true.
Okay.
The first one is about to begin in England. And again, if you read the cast review, she talks about it in there. If you read just the summary, it's just a 2 or 3 page summary. She says what they need is to do a review. So what they did in England was the kids who were already on puberty blockers were allowed to remain on them. But, and I don't agree with this, but they've been recruiting kids for the first ever clinical trial. And I don't think you can do that ethically because there's no such thing as a child born in the wrong body, and they shouldn't be blocking puberty in any of these kids. We've been around as a species for a long time. Kids weren't killing themselves because they were born in the wrong body. This wasn't a problem. This is what you call iatrogenic harm. It's you're putting this idea in these kids' minds, and then you're medicalizing them, and you're causing the actual harm through the medicalization process. And it's a social contagion. I tweeted out, if you go to my Twitter and scroll down a couple days, you'll see the statistics over the years from kids that were born in the 40s all the way up into kids that were born 20 years ago. How many of them now identify as transgender?
Yeah.
How many of them now identify? Not how many of them did. And it's just this exponential chart.
Like, I mean, the same happened with homosexuality and stuff, right? Once
Not
it
like
became
this.
more
Not-
socially acceptable, people were more comfortable coming out, right?
Those numbers have never been anything like this. This is an absolute explosion. Over 10 years, like, 10,000, like 4,000% over 10 years. Depends when you look at it, because really around 2010, 2015, it was just a handful of cases, started to tick up, and then really exploded. Coincides with the advent of social media, coincides with some big events like, Bruce Jenner becoming Caitlyn and this getting popularized in the media. Coincides with shows like I Am Jazz, where you've got 1 million viewers watching the transition of this little boy for 10 seasons or whatever it was. And it's putting the idea in their heads. It's putting,
a TV show?
yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, and he had his vaginoplasty done as a minor. It's all on TV, celebrated, as they castrate and invert the penis of a child. Jazz Jennings, very famous case.
And is Jazz Jennings older now, or was this a while?
Yeah, now he's like, I don't know, 20, 21.
And
He's had weight.
happy or
I don't know. He's had
I don't know.
he's had a lot of. You can look into this.
Yeah, I will.
I don't speak for another person's emotional state, but I'd say he's not been doing that great. He had big weight issues. He put on like 100 pounds.
Okay.
And what happens when they do these vaginoplasties, they have to dilate this wound for the rest of their life before it closes up. He had to have 2 subsequent surgeries because of complications. You've got his mom on TV saying if he doesn't dilate that thing, she will wake him up in the middle of the night and put it in herself.
Right.
Like, she's nuts. She's crazy. She's one of these Munchausen by proxy moms.
Okay.
And in a lot of these cases, you've got moms pushing this. And there was a small study, admittedly it's small, going back 15, 20 years, that looked into the boys with gender dysphoria. 52% of their mothers had borderline personality disorder, compared to just 6% of the general population. So it's not a coincidence.
Right.
It's positive.
Is there anything, like, because I'm going to go home, definitely look at the stats.
Yeah.
I like doing research on things I'm maybe not as familiar with. You seem pretty set in your ways. Is there any way that, like, anything that would change your mind on the way that you feel about this? Like, if studies did come out saying that vast majority of people are happier upon doing these medical procedures, or I don't know, right? Like, is there anything that would actually potentially sway you?
So you're not going to tell me that, no one's ever going to tell me that literally sterilizing and mutilating a child is going to make them happier.
Right. I
That's
don't
just
think
not
that's
right.
happening very often. So,
And
which I'm going to look into
you'll
tonight,
learn.
but I think those numbers are very much inflated. So,
Well, even if it was
I
one
think
child they
they're-
were doing that to, you couldn't argue with me ever that they should even do that to one child.
right.
No, we don't do that to children. That's just not what's done in a healthy society. You don't cut off body parts of children.
Yeah, fair enough.
There's a condition called apotemnophilia. This is where people think they have a limb that doesn't belong.
Right.
And years ago, they actually cut off the legs of 2 different men. Healthy legs. They cut them off
Yeah.
because they wanted them cut off. Maybe they'll say they're happier, right? Does that mean that we should cut off their legs? No, and they put a stop to that. Actually, last year they cut off 2 fingers of a man in Canada who felt like these 2 fingers didn't belong. This is a mental illness. And we don't treat mental illnesses by cutting off body parts. We help them with the mental struggles that they're having.
Right.
And so, no, you'll never convince me we should be doing this to kids. The very message itself that they're born in the wrong body is an abusive message.
Right.
It's the opposite of what we should be saying. And again, this wouldn't come into children's heads. It never comes into their heads on their own. It's in the culture, it's online, it's everywhere. It's everywhere. These kids online are falling into it. It's taught in schools.
What about with adults though? Like, are you willing to change your mind on that, or like just be?
Look,
Or is your focus is on?
My focus is on kids.
Right.
I mean, that's another conversation.
Just because
You can't stop an adult from doing something to their body, but the doctors don't have to be doing it. If I was a doctor, I would never cut off someone's body parts.
Right.
I've sworn an oath to first do no harm as a doctor. I'm not a doctor, but if I was, that's the oath I've sworn.
Yeah.
It's not do harm because they want it. Women aren't supposed to take testosterone. They produce a little bit, just as men produce a little estrogen.
Mhm.
But in the quantities that it's being given to them, it's causing harm. There's, again, in the WPATH files, you'll find some evidence that these are causing cancers. There's specifically a case mentioned of one of these young females coming down with liver cancer, and the doctor can't say for sure, but she's very confident that it was because of the testosterone. But again, we don't have studies, right?
Yeah.
So it's hard to put a
Right, and
quantitative
you're so
thing
against
on
it
it.
that you don't want the studies to even happen.
This
right?
ideology itself is the problem, and
See, that's where
this used to affect one out of tens of thousands.
My problem lies with you is that I find you're so unwilling to. Like, I think if you look historically, like, transgenderism has been a thing, right? Like, it's not a new.
So I hear this all the time, and we have, even in Canada especially, we use the 2S for two-spirit,
Right.
which other countries don't use.
Yeah.
You'll find when you look into that these were gay men, and I've done that.
I mean, I think.
But even if there was such a thing, you know, there were feminine males, masculine females. In almost all these cases in history, it's gay men. But okay, so you're an effeminate male. Okay, you can be an effeminate male. You don't need a label.
Okay.
And you certainly don't need to be medicalized. And what they weren't doing in generations past and in other cultures, they weren't stopping puberty in children. They weren't cutting off the body parts of children. So that argument just falls flat on its face because they weren't medicalizing people because of gender nonconforming behavior. My message is be gender nonconforming. Great.
Right. But I do think, again, I have to look into it. I do think that there's cases that, again, I'm speaking someone with very little knowledge on this, but cases where people do get the help, or maybe not help's not the word you want to hear, people do get the medical procedures and the medicine and whatever, and it does lead to a happier, more fulfilling life, right? Like someone like Caitlyn Jenner, for example, I think is much happier as Caitlyn Jenner than they were as Bruce Jenner.
So
I don't know them at all.
Well, Bruce seemed pretty happy to me, but
why?
But here we're talking about a separate issue again. Here we're talking about a separate issue, so it's another thing for you to research, as my signs keep blowing everywhere. Autogynephilia.
Right.
Have you heard of that?
I have heard of that.
All right. So when you look into Bruce Jenner's case specifically, his family found out when they came home and he was wearing his 10-year-old's panties. This is a sexual fetish. This is different. It's totally different than what's going on with kids. This is a sexual fetish. Autogynephilia breaks down into 3 root words that literally mean attraction to self as a woman. And it's a sexual thing.
So is this something that Bruce Jenner had, or you're just making the assumption?
Something,
Like,
it's something that he has when you, I mean, I'm not Bruce Jenner, but
right.
virtually all of these adult males who transition in middle age, it's that.
I just find like you're so like, yeah, they're not
Yeah.
happy, they're this, they're that. Like, it's very easy for you to dismiss people that have gone through it and seem to have come out more positive, right?
Thank you.
Yeah. Hold that sign up. Yeah.
Thank you, guys. Yeah, well,
Right. Like
transgenderism is made up. So
Right.
Bruce
So
Jenner
basically,
can have
it would be
whatever.
pretty much impossible to change your mind on anything.
Well, first of all, someone would have to be able to define transgender for me.
Right. What does Google say? Like if I were to Google transgender, you know, the definition.
It'll say someone whose gender identity
Right.
doesn't coincide with their sex. So it's using a circular definition already. This brings us to the next question, what's gender identity? What is gender? You can read Judith Butler, for example, one of the world's premier authorities on this. She teaches out of Berkeley University.
Right.
They essentially believe that our gender is whatever we want it to be. That we're all performing. One sec. For them, we're all performing the stereotypes associated with our sex. Or if you claim to be transgender, you're performing the stereotypes associated with the other sex.
Mhm.
That we're all living in drag, essentially. This is how they think.
Okay.
But what is gender identity? It just comes down to stereotypes. That's all it does, every single time. No matter what you read, no matter who you talk to. If you look at the most used resource in the world, it's this cute little image of a gingerbread man called the genderbread person.
Okay.
And it's literally used in children's hospitals to teach staff about gender identity. It's just an activist-produced one-pager. And you can look this up, the genderbread person, look up the poster on version 4. It's the most detailed description. And it says your gender identity is based on your personality, your job, your hobbies, your likes and dislikes, your roles in society, and expectations upon you. So I would say, and this is a very progressive message, that it's very sexist and regressive to say that someone's job or hobbies determines their gender. What kind of message are we sending to children when we tell them that their hobbies or their likes and dislikes determine their gender? You can listen to the top health professionals from these children's hospitals, like at Boston Children's Hospital. I tweeted out these videos.
Yeah.
And Dr. Jeremy Carswell is a woman who runs the Gender Multi-Specialty Clinic at Boston Children's Hospital. It was the #1 ranked pediatric hospital in the country. And she says it's things like playing with the opposite gender toys, a girl trying to pee standing up, a boy trying to pee sitting down, trying on a sibling's clothing. These are all signs that your child is transgender and can be treated. What a load of absolute nonsense. Tomboys are not actual boys. More than half of women growing up were tomboys. I know this because I give public talks all the time and I'll ask the audience. They almost all try to pee standing up.
Right.
If you got bigger brothers, they're all trying to pee standing up.
Right.
You know, playing in the dirt, climbing trees, throwing around a football doesn't make you a boy. It's called having fun. Playing with Barbies doesn't make you a girl. Playing with G.I. Joe doesn't make you a boy.
Right.
But that's the message. And it's not just one person saying that. They're all saying this. So it's all stereotypes. So therefore, if you went into a culture where the stereotypes were flipped, I guess your gender would now be the opposite. So we're going to tell kids who don't meet stereotypes that they were born in the wrong body, and we're going to medicalize them? That's totally insane.
Right. I see what you're saying. I think that, I don't know. I think that the things you're saying are very extreme examples.
I wish they were.
Like,
and I want you to research it for yourself.
Yeah, I do want to go look up.
You can look up Mermaids, which is the principal TQ activist organization for children in the UK. And they were putting huge pressure on the Tavistock. They had resources on their website saying, yes, it's things like toys that determine your gender. So now we're going to confuse little kids, little autistic kids, little girls who want to play with boy toys, that they're boys.
Right.
Wow. Not okay. Not okay. And the thing is, all the people on the other side of this argument from me, they all agree with me on this. Of course they do. We shouldn't put kids in some stereotypical box. And that's the progressive message. They have a blind spot where they don't see that they're pushing stereotypes to such a degree that a kid who doesn't conform to them now needs to get body parts removed and go on puberty blockers. Just say to these gender non-conforming kids that they're beautiful just as they are. That's the message.
All right. Well, I appreciate you having the chat with me.
Thank you.
I can't say I agree with you, but I mean, you're reasonable and for having a conversation. I appreciate that. I am going to go look this up. But you're here tomorrow? And
yeah, I'm coming just for the opening and closing bell tomorrow, but I have a protest here Friday.
Okay.
There'll be a lot of people here Friday.
Okay, because I live in the area, so I'll probably be walking around again.
Yeah, Friday's going to be crazy.
Yeah.
Probably. Last time I was here, I promoted it more, but there were like 400 or 500 people on my side, 400 or 500 on the other, and it was totally mental.
Okay.
I think 5 of the trans activist crowd got arrested that day, and
Yeah.
a lot of the Muslims came out.
Yeah.
I don't expect them to come out because I don't agree with them on Hamas and stuff. But yeah, I'll be here morning bell, closing bell
All right.
tomorrow,
Well,
and I'll be at
will-
Parliament. I have to go to Parliament right now.
I'm gonna go do some research.
All right, man.
Do some reading.
What's your name?
Will.
Nice to meet you.
Yeah.
Thanks for
I
chatting.
feel bad shaking your hand because I really disagree with you.
You didn't really disagree with much I said, though.
No, well, I mean, I'm trying to be polite.
Well,
you know,
I'm
'cause I
open to
think-
hearing where I'm
I
wrong.
think the good way to maybe change somebody's mind is to have a civil conversation, right? And I feel like I'm a little bit out of my. I don't know enough about this to comment on it per
That's
se.
fair.
Which is why I want to go do some research. And yeah, I think your numbers are way off. But,
Well, I told you where to go to find the real ones.
yeah, I got
Yep.
it on my notes. So, anyways.
Can't argue with them. It's from the hospitals and the I forget the name of the insurance, database, but
Yeah.
it's just from that.
Okay.
Yep.
All right. Well, I'll see you around.
All right. Thanks, Will.